This video will be very spoiler-free when discussing story elements or showing certain parts of Dragon Age The Veilguard. Dragon Age is first and foremost a story-based RPG, and I've done my best to keep that integrity for you, but without further ado, let's go. Dragon Age The Veilguard is a good, sometimes great fantasy action RPG, but it's not a very good Dragon Age game. The standalone nature of the game's story, whilst trying to honor the history of the Inquisitor and the cliffhanger that the previous game left, without alienating casual or new fans, lands in this odd dynamic of good, often repetitive mission design, some minor fun cameos, massive lore reveals for the Dragon Age world, but it still just doesn't go far enough in either direction to call this a true Dragon Age sequel. Let me know any questions you have about the game in the comments and I'll get back to you. I really struggled with my thoughts about Veilguard. I love a lot of what's in this game. The companions, the combat, a lot of the world design are all varying degrees of fantastic that I'll get into as we explore through this review, but there is some odd design and story decisions that really left me disappointed, especially when you consider we have waited 10 years for a Dragon Age sequel to a massive cliffhanger that was left at the end of Inquisition. While I don't think it's fair to put pressure on BioWare because of the 10 years that have passed and the rocky launches of their previous titles, it's unfortunately the nature of the beast, especially when Dragon Age and BioWare games in general have typically been known for their exceptional storytelling, the world building and the characters. It really left me in a weird place for this review. So let's start with some performance chatter. I don't want to go too deep into the performance aspects of Dragon Age The Veilguard, but the game runs extremely well on my RTX 4090, as you probably expect. I had a couple of visual hiccups here and there, like some texture flickering or some FES drops, but for the most part, it ran almost flawlessly. I used all the NVIDIA DLSS features that were available, but some of them weren't available until the recent NVIDIA driver that recently went out, but I played at 4K, completely maxed out at all of the settings, ray tracing, etc., and floated between 60 and 80 FPS with no frame gen for that entire time. Your mileage may vary, and if you are playing on console, I do recommend you check a review for that specific console. But visually, I was quite impressed at the game's lighting and ray tracing environments, like overall across the board. Every environment that I come across, whether it be new or old, always looked stunning. I also particularly really like the hair threads system where you can see like the individual strands of hair. It's a super weird thing to focus on, but like I found myself constantly looking at Nev's hair like, damn, that's some nice hair. But
excuse me, mommy? Sorry, mommy? Sorry, mommy? Sorry.
It works, right? It's a really cool feature that I think really works, especially when the lighting aspects are like bouncing off those individual strands because of the ray tracing. The art style does grow on you over the journey as well. Like, I know there's a lot of criticism about how the way the characters look, like their smooth skins and faces, but it wasn't a real issue. Like, I didn't find that to impact my gameplay or enjoyment of the game in any real way.
Where does this go?
Another dark hole.
Think you could find us a route?
Maybe. I'll take a look.
So Dragon Age The Veilguard is more structured world design compared to Dragon Age Inquisition's giant open world areas. I would liken it closer to a Mass Effect Andromeda, where the story pulls you between various hub areas that you can then freely explore after each mission, and these hub areas will continue to expand as you complete side quests and companion quests, unlocking new areas with new chests for gear, altars for skill points or HP, and other secrets to uncover. The major hub area of the game, or its, say, connective tissue between all of the areas, is the Crossroads. This is a central hub location that holds gateways to all the other areas, but will also develop over your journey, unlocking new areas with powerful mini-bosses, its own puzzles, and it will also peel back the mystery surrounding Solus's past and how this ancient elf lived for thousands of years and became the Dreadwolf. The early hours of the journey, as the game is slowly showing you all of its systems, its gear systems, its faction reputation, the Crossroads and everything it has to offer, are quite slow and have a lot of like odd pacing decisions. Like for example, you get 2 mages and 2 rogue companions before a single warrior companion, which as a rogue player that I was, or even if you were playing as a mage, it leads to some weird like annoying balancing issues with the party, and also to understand the intricacies of the primer and detonation combat system, as you're literally missing a third of that puzzle piece because you don't get that warrior companion until much later. But then once you do get that first warrior, it does really actually kick off the story. Gathering these companions will introduce you to their faction's hub areas that hold side quests, collectibles, reputation to gain for the faction as well, so they're better equipped to help you fight the gods at a later date, but also to unlock higher tier gear from their respective vendors. When you gather these early companions and complete each of the main missions, there's a lot of exposition and characters and like chaos generally before the game says, all right, you can go off on your own now. And part of that issue is the second that I was let loose, I was like, hell yeah, let me go and do all the side quests. But oh, hold up a minute. Half of these areas are locked behind pathways because of companion abilities. Each companion has a unique ability, by the way, that can manipulate the world in a various way, or via quests that unlock those areas that aren't available to a certain date. Now, this sort of de-incentivizes you to explore, and during those first 10 to 15 hours, it leads to an odd balance of wanting to take a break from the main story and the chaos that's happening there, but then, oh, you can't do a whole lot of side quests because none of those areas are available to you. A lot of areas are locked. You can't do too much exploring, so then you're forced back into the main quest, and then pushes you further than maybe you wanted to go. But once the story does let you free and you have all the companions, the game really does hit its stride. Maybe
I'm guessing you're the reason we're here.
Who are you? Who sent you?
You call Manfred Fred?
Sure. You walked into my office. I said, Fred, can I call you Fred? You nodded. Seemed happy about it. If he doesn't like it...
Oh, Manfred doesn't mind. He quite likes you.
maybe a little hit and miss, but overall the companions are some of the best parts about the game. They are all vastly different companions with their own stories, tied to one of the game's 6 factions, plus Harding, who's tied to the Inquisition. As you interact with each faction and do their side quests in their area, you'll slowly peel back the layers of what's happening in their corner of Northern Thedas and learn more about that companion and that faction's struggles. I do think most people will connect with 2 or 3 companions that they just really vibe with. Maybe it's Balara's upbeat, overly positive attitude, the gruff, direct nature of Tash, or Asan the Griffin playing rock, paper, scissors with Manfred, or it could just be as simple as Nev's beautiful hair. There is something that most RPG fans, I suspect, will connect with here. There is also a lot of intentionality in how the game's quests are handed out to you or not handed out to you as well. Companion missions are typically available to you at the lighthouse. You'll need to go and interact with them to get that quest. Now, these are typically slower paced quests revolving around dialogue, some light puzzle solving. Side quests, however, are only found in their specific regions, and you'll typically need to go to those regions to actually see the quest marker and unlock that quest and then go and complete that quest. These side quests are just like typical, pretty standard video game stuff here, right? Like kill some things, collect X, hand it in. You'll get some faction reputation that you can then use to, say, upgrade the faction vendor, and then you'll be able to unlock some different gear from that, right? The fact that these quests and objectives are only present to you if you actually seek them out feels like a direct response to Inquisition's feedback. So it doesn't overwhelm you with the content that was in Inquisition, but it is there if you want it, but it's only if you want it and choose to seek it out. I also quite liked the design of many of the companion quests, as they do change the pacing from the repetitive nature of the main quest or some of these side quests. Most are dialogue or puzzle based, which I enjoyed throughout the mid game because it gives you that breadth of time to sort of sit and talk to these companions who are all very well voice acted, and the writing in these is often some of the best in the game, though some of them aren't great. I'm looking at you, Balara, but the downside is that these also get a little bit repetitive throughout the game because these quests are essentially the same style of quest for all 7 companions, and you want to do all of these to unlock their Veilguard skill and their unique armor in hopes that they will survive the fight to come. But once you realize as well that that puzzle design doesn't grow or develop throughout the game, it's just the same activate this barrier with the orb thing, or unlock this doorway with the companion ability, that does get very repetitive very quickly. This repetition is really felt in the mission designs. There are constantly red crystals, or these like blight balls that you need to destroy to unlock pathways outside and inside combat in pretty much every single one of the main missions. Outside combat, this just like unlocks the next like pathway, and inside combat you need to do this because enemies will be invulnerable or they just keep respawning until you destroy it. Now this got old for me very quickly, especially when a lot of the boss fights at the end of these missions reuse these mechanics as well, and then they all have that same rock paper scissors of the blue health bar you use range attacks, yellow health bar you use heavy, and the red health bars you use light attacks, and then you shoot the red crystals or the blight balls and you rinse and repeat. While there is nothing inherently wrong with this design at all, it fails to understand that this is a 40 to 100 hour massive RPG, and it does very little to develop this mission design or the combat loop further past these elements to keep it fresh over that lengthy runtime. Very quickly you have seen every single enemy that the game has available to you, its various mechanics, as well as how these red crystals and the blight ball mechanics actually work, and then it reuses those systems throughout the entire game. There are a couple of standout missions that have entirely unique encounters, particularly the Weishaupt set piece and the final mission was some of my absolute favorites in the game that really felt fresh and different, but overall I was left wanting for something to change in this formula as I was grinding through all of these quests and trying to complete all of my companion storylines and trying to unlock everything that the factions have available to me. It can be a little bit disappointing because the core combat loop here, however, is actually extremely satisfying. So I have played all three classes, but I finished the game with the rogue, and I played as like a melee necrotic focused rogue. I used Emmerich as a mage because of the combat synergies with the necrotic damage there, and I tried all three specs and played with multiple builds and tinkered with a lot of the gear, and I'll have multiple class guides coming out after launch for all of the classes, so make sure you like and subscribe and do all that YouTube stuff. I covered a lot of my combat feedback in my preview, and I want to rehash that same conversation here as my thoughts haven't really changed drastically since then. It all comes together very well with a strong impact to your abilities and like the basic light, heavy, sprint, charged, and jump attacks. Enemies react to heavy hits, they bounce off walls and other obstacles for extra stagger, which when that stagger bar fills up, you can follow up with devastating takedown attacks. But I brought up in my preview about how there's a lot happening on the screen, and the camera sometimes has its issues with that being too close to you so you can't see the large enemies, or just having weird camera angles where I couldn't see what is happening. And this is often increased by the UI elements on screen. While yes, you can turn off a lot of the UI elements, it's not as customizable as I thought it was going to be or as I would have liked. I think the core thing here is it's not necessarily customizable, it's that you can turn off a lot of the elements. Now, turning off the elements doesn't remove the fact that there is still a lot of mess of colors and particle effects happening on the screen, especially when you detonate a primer. So all of these abilities, or most of the abilities, will apply a certain effect, and then you can detonate that effect for like additional effects and like massive damage. That detonation effect is a giant yellow diamond effect that is huge on the screen, especially once you have a really core strong build where you can create multiple detonations at once. You've essentially got these like massive yellow particle effects on the screen, and it does get quite messy. For some reason as well, you always have your active buffs and debuffs in the left corner above your health bar. This is great, right? Like, I love stats. I'm a stat nerd. I like to make builds. I want to know what's active and what's not active at certain times. Totally 100% get that. The issue here is that it has a unique icon, and the descriptive text is there as well. Now, when you've got 5, 6, 7, like hundreds of these active at once, this is just like a massive list on the left-hand side of the screen. I don't understand why this isn't just the icon or the text, or a choice of both in the settings. What I would have really liked is just the icon, and then when you bring up the ability wheel that pauses the game, that menu list expands to actually tell you what those specific like full effects are, but you can't change this, right? Like you can either turn it on or off. You can't change that you've got this massive list, but you want that list because you want to know what's active for your build, so those major effects are working, so you can then land those massive hits. It's not a huge complaint, but it's just those like little nitpicks about things like these massive particle effects and all of these like little effect things that are just on the side that just feel like they could have been cleaned up a little bit more to really make the combat system sing, because the combat is fun. It's a great time, like smacking enemies and seeing them bounce around and do all sorts of things. But the downside is that sometimes I can't see it, so it's hard to have fun when I can't see what's happening. It's things like this and the similar mission and enemy designs across long play sessions that really left me wanting. There are some incredibly designed missions that really stand out, like I mentioned, especially that final mission of the game. But what I would have really liked is just something to change much later down the line, to add a new enemy type or some sort of new mechanic to really keep the gameplay fresh across the long play time of the game. But we've got to talk about gear and progression. Progression and build diversity is really strong here across all the 3 classes and the specializations. There is just so much gear, guys. Like, you're going to be picking up all sorts of stuff. But the downside to this gear system is what I brought up in my preview. It's got some issues, right? So just to recap how the gear works, right? You'll have chests all over the place. You'll open a chest and you'll either get a new piece of gear or it will be an existing piece of gear that you already have. Now that existing piece, rather than giving you a copy, it'll increase the quality of the piece you already had and will add like a new effect to it. Now this will go all the way up to legendary and have like 4 different effects. The downside to this is that every single slot for Rook and your 7 companions is unique. And what that means is that no companion or Rook can share a single trinket, weapon, armor piece, ring, what have you. It is all entirely unique. So every time you open a chest, you're going to get a unique piece of gear for one specific slot, for one specific companion or Rook. And it may be a companion you don't even use. It may be like a build for Rook that you don't use, because there is a lot of gear for Rook, because there's a lot of build diversity here, and it's very rare that you'll actually get a piece of something that you're specifically looking for. Now, there are ways to get gear for things that you do specifically want, right? By leveling up a faction vendor, you can almost guarantee you'll get specific themed pieces that you're looking for. For example, for my necrotic rogue, because the Mornwatch guys like necromancers, they've got a lot of necrotic themed gear, so it sort of works perfectly there. But this is where you can really feel some of that multiplayer game energy from seemingly where the game begun its journey as a multiplayer game, because of the RNG systems baked into the gear, plus like the reputation and having to grind out that reputation by doing these side quests, etc., to level up these vendors so you can then unlock the higher pieces of gear that they have, like the unique or whatever they've actually got for you. The system does work, like it's not necessarily bad, but it's quite disappointing that you're going to be opening hundreds and hundreds of chests in this game, and you look at the gear and I would say maybe 20 to 30% of the time you're like, oh, I'm actually going to use this, or this is something valuable. A lot of the time it's something that just means nothing to you and you just have it in your inventory now, or it's leveling up an existing piece that you already know that you're never going to use. I have been enjoying tinkering with the skill system though, because you can completely refund all your skills for free, and there's a lot of intricacies and synergies between certain skills and traits and how you can connect them versus the specializations and what they unlock. That has been a fun way to keep some of that gameplay feel fresh over the long session. But once you've found a build that you really like and that you have the gear for, you kind of want to stick to that, because it's so hard to really build out a brand new build, because there's no guarantee that you're going to get gear pieces that fit with that build, if that makes sense. Picking up 10 years after the events of Inquisition, Solus has finally figured out how to tear down the Veil, and as Rook, you're immediately thrust into the role of the leader of the Veilguard and trying to stop the 2 elven gods he's accidentally let loose, while struggling to balance your rocky relationship with Solus, your companions, and the 6 factions. Learning about Solus's past and slowly peeling back the layers of the God of Lies, treachery, and betrayal, depending on the story, has been one of the best parts about the game's story. While it is hard to connect again to another main character in Dragon Age, especially when there is one that has a really solid relationship with Solus already, but this time we're playing as Rook, and Rook is a good vessel for some quick quips, some well-delivered lines to sort of let that main character, protagonist shine, but mostly a lot lot of that growth and character progression comes from the companions. Rook doesn't really change throughout that whole journey. Keeping things very vague here, a lot of the problems I have with the game's story stem from the fact that it doesn't respect what made Dragon Age special. If you're a casual Dragon Age fan or RPG fan or action game fan, etc., you're going to enjoy this game, right? There's all the common fantasy tropes here that you'll be used to with these sort of games, and it's just a solid story that'll see you through to the end. But it doesn't do enough for a Dragon Age fan who has played the previous 3 games and waited a very long time for this sequel. Most of these criticisms stem from its half-hearted attempt to honor that past. Whilst some well-known and established characters from Dragon Age lore do make cameo appearances, it's overall falls flat when you can't ask them those burning questions that you have, or I may have, like, what have you been doing for these last 10 years? Like, how is X person or Y person or what have you? These questions just like simply aren't available to you. This is really felt with all the scenes involving the Inquisitor and occasionally Harding when she talks about her past events. I really wish BioWare either gave us an option to say, hey, look, I know a ton about Dragon Age lore and the characters, you can go overboard with all the lore and names, etc. here, rather than keeping it extremely light and easy to understand, aiming to hit that casual audience. Or another option would be to have like that lore compendium like they had in Final Fantasy 16, where you can just like pause the game at any time and bring up like a massive deep dive of every character, event, and history of the world. There is a balance that they could have struck here, and we've seen other games do it better, especially like in Final Fantasy 16, but they've unfortunately lent on the more casual side of things, which if you're a casual fan of these sort of games, it's gonna be totally fine for you, but I can just see that as a true Dragon Age fan that some people are going to be let down. What the game does, however, do well is the companion stories. They're some of the best content in the game, and those character arcs and where those moments go. I especially liked Tasha's and the end of her story. There's this incredible voice line that she delivers in like the last part of her story that just really hit home for me. But these companion stories do lead to some odd pacing in the main story, as there's basically a moment in the main story where it's just like, hang on a minute, let's just not do anything for like the next 3 or 4 quests so you can go and do all this other stuff, which then slows down that core like story that's happening and this, you know, big apocalypse that's impending, so you can then go and do these side activities, and then it picks up again at a certain point. It just again leads to those odd pacing decisions. But a lot of RPGs struggle with this, between the balance of having a big apocalyptic disaster you have to solve and the side quests and companion stories that you may need to do. There is a balance to be struck there that not a lot of games can get right, but this is one that definitely doesn't find that balance very well. But regardless, I do think it is a journey worth going on, whether you're a casual RPG fan or a fan of Dragon Age. I know people are going to skip to the end of this video to hear whether or not you should play Dragon Age The Veilguard. If you've done that, the answer is yes, you should play it. But if you're interested in a more nuanced opinion, I'm just very conflicted about this game. Like, Dragon Age Origins is up there as one of my favorite childhood games. I've spoken about in the past on this channel about how as a kid we didn't have a lot of money, so I replayed a lot of RPGs, Fallout 3, Oblivion, Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age, and Mass Effect for that matter. Central franchises to my deep love for RPGs, and in no small part as to why this channel exists. I truly love a lot of the work that's gone into Dragon Age The Veilguard. There is legitimately a lot of fun to be had here, but whether it's the unrealistic expectations in my head for having to wait 10 years for this game, or it's just simply how it is now that I have to sit down and think critically about this genre of games that I love so deeply. I've really struggled to put my thoughts on the page, and probably more so than any other review. I've completely rewritten this 3,000 word review twice, and this is the 5th iteration of the ending, and we're doing it with my face rather than how we would normally end a video. I've also made Nick wait an extra 2 days before start editing this video because I wasn't happy with the content. But what I hope you really gain from this review is that I love RPGs and I want them to be as good as they possibly can be. And when I'm tasked with reviewing one, especially for a franchise that I've played for like literally half my life, as Dragon Age Origins came out when I was 15 and I'm now 30, I find it quite challenging to come down to a final response here. And in that time, since Dragon Age Origins, I've reinvented myself multiple times. I started my professional career as a personal trainer. I moved into IT for 9 years, and now I talk into a microphone about video games. This franchise has also reinvented itself along the way as well, with each new release completely changing aspects of the game. And I think that's also what makes it really hard to think about Veilguard as a Dragon Age game and not just an action RPG, is because it's vastly different to the other games in this series. Dragon Age hasn't really hit the high of Origins since that time, and I'm not sure after Veilguard if it ever will hit that high again. But even as a die-hard Dragon Age fan, Dragon Age Veilguard is a must-play game. If you're a die-hard fan who knows everything about the lore, you might be left disappointed by the time the credits roll and you get off this roller coaster. But that doesn't mean the ride, its ups, its downs, its twists and turns weren't extremely fun along the way, and I hope that you can see the fun bleeding through this review and not just the critical elements that I brought up that I wasn't happy with. But let me know any questions you have in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.